Okay, welcome all to our third class on Judaism Decoded, diving deep into the origins and the evolution of Jewish tradition. David did point out to me that the sixth class, which is going to be in 3 weeks, Wednesday, is going to be the same night as my sister's wedding.
Oh,
Rishon. Well, obviously, I was torn whether I should go to the wedding or give the class, but it seems like I should be going to the wedding. So I will be in touch with you regarding rescheduling either to the Tuesday before, the day before, or the following Wednesday, and I'll go after the majority vote. Um, okay, let's get started. We are in lesson 3, and this lesson is about the power of the people. And I will begin this lesson with a quick clip which I am sure you are familiar with.
Rabbi, may I ask you a question?
Certainly, Labish.
Is there a proper blessing for the Tsar?
A blessing for the Tsar, of course. May God bless and keep the Tsar far away from us.
Okay, so there is a blessing for a czar. There actually is. That's not the blessing for the czar. That was a joke, and I don't know if the producer of this movie knew about the blessing for the czar, but there actually is a blessing that we make on the czar, and there are many blessings that we make. So let's talk about a few blessings that we make in Jewish tradition. So generally, we know that there are there is the standard language of a blessing, which you see on top of your screen. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us dot dot dot. And depending on what we're blessing, the language will change. So he commanded us to kindle the light of the Holy Shabbat. He commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah light. He commanded us concerning the washing of the hands. These are various blessings that you are probably familiar with. Yes? Show of hands. Okay. So the question that I pose to you is, how is it appropriate to say that God commanded us to light the Shabbos candles? When and where did God command us to light Shabbos candles? There is no verse in the Torah that tells us to do so, and there isn't even an implied verse. It's not something that the rabbis could have derived from the Torah in any way, shape, or form. And it's also not something that Moses told us when he came down from the mountain. So
those
when did God
tricky
command
rabbis.
us? David?
Those tricky rabbis.
Oh, very good. So join me in page number 71, text number 1. And not only is the question a question, but the question is actually brought in the Talmud. It's talking about the tricky rabbis. The rabbis are the ones that actually asked the question. This is referring to the menorah lighting. And everyone understands that the whole Hanukkah story happened, many years into our history. So this couldn't have been something that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai, and yet we say God commanded us to light the menorah. And God didn't command us to light the menorah. So how could we say that? So this is the Talmud, which is talking about lighting the menorah, and the Talmud says, what's the blessing? What blessing is recited? I'm in text number 1, page 71. What blessing is recited for the kindling of the menorah? The Talmud answers, 1, recite the blessing, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah light. The Talmud asks, but where did he command us? The Talmud answers, Rav Avia said, in the verse, you shall not divert. So in Talmudic tradition, the verse is not brought entirely because it's assumed that you know the verse, you know the context of the verse. He just makes a quick reference. So let's talk about this verse. I have the verse over here on the screen, and it says as follows: if a matter eludes you, this is a verse in Deuteronomy, and it reads, if a matter eludes you, you shall come to the Levitic priests and to the judge who will be in those days, and they will tell you the words of judgment. You shall do according to the word that they tell you. So this so far is telling a very simple thing. God is biblically commanding us on the concept of judges and to follow the rule of the judges. However, and that's like a something which I would think is obvious, it makes sense, you need it for social norms. But then the verse continues, and the verse says as follows: you shall do according to the law they instruct you, and according to the judgment they say to you. You shall not divert from the word they tell you, either right or left. Okay, so that it just sounds very poetic, and like the Torah, the Bible, is just telling us a lot of words to say the same thing. The problem is that God is not a poet. We know that every word in Torah is exact, and what exactly is the message that God is telling us, aside from listening to their instruction? He also says, you shall not divert from the word right or left. What is that adding? So what that is adding is the ability, God is giving the ability to the rabbis of the generation to enact a novel legislation. So we spoke about this in the past, how in the court system today, there are times that we will derive legislation from a previous legislation, and then there is the concept of enacting a novel legislation, and this exists within the Torah as well, where the rabbis have that ability to create new legislation. So we have this in terms of the two parts of the verse. There's the narrow obligation, you shall listen to the judges, and then there's the broader obligation, which you could see on the bottom, which is do not divert right or left. So then the question obviously is, how does that make the commandment of the rabbis a biblical decree? How could I go ahead and say, God commanded me to light the Shabbos candles, God commanded me to light the menorah? So join me on page 73, text number 3. And this is a quote from Maimonides. Maimonides writes, it follows therefore that when we mean to say, blessed are you who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to listen to those who commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah light. So Maimonides explains that when we say the blessing, thank you God for sanctifying us and commanding us to kindle the Hanukkah lights, what are we essentially saying? We're saying thank you for commanding us to listen to our sages who has told us to kindle the Hanukkah lights. So in the sense that God was the one that wrote in the Bible that we should listen to our judges, what the judges say, in a sense, become the word of God. Not because God commanded it, this is not God's word, but God said, listen to them. So by us listening to them, we're listening to God. Perhaps a very simple way of thinking about this, and we'll get more to this soon, but a simple way of thinking about this would be, the Congress gave a certain power to the FDA. And if someone doesn't follow the legislation of the FDA, essentially, they are therefore disobeying Congress, although Congress is not the one that enacts the legislations of the FDA. But since Congress says we put a certain trust in the FDA, and we're going to follow what the FDA says, so if someone violates something from the FDA, essentially they are violating a federal legislation. Okay, so that's a simple way of putting it, and therefore, whenever we do something that the rabbis enacted, we will say the blessing, blessed are you, God, who commanded us to light the menorah. In other words, who commanded us to listen to the sages who told us to light the menorah. A little bit of background around the sages and what they're all about and how that worked, and I think we'll get a little bit more into this in this lesson and the following lessons. but there's something called the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was a group of 71 rabbis. These 71 rabbis were the 71 greatest scholars of the time, in biblical times, in the time of the temple, and they sat in the Beit HaMikdash, in the Holy Temple. So in the Holy Temple, there was a room called the Lishkas Hagazis, and this room was set up as a courtroom. And there's a description of exactly how it was set up. There was like a long half circle, and you had all 71 judges sitting around, and then there was area for the plaintiffs to come in, and they were the ones that primarily dealt with any big issues, and they were the ones that would enact greater responsibilities, which we'll get to some of them throughout this lesson. And as time went on, eventually this Sanhedrin ceased to exist, yet there is still power given to rabbis within the jurisdiction that they're in. So there is no rabbi today that could enact a decree that's going to apply to all the Jewish people. But a rabbi of a community does have the right to go ahead and say, this and this must be done, and because for the sake of his community, and the community would now have an obligation to follow that rabbi, since the Torah says that you should listen to your rabbis and judges. Okay, so this leads me to the third category of oral Torah. We spoke about the received oral Torah, meaning there are the things that are not written, but Moses brought it down on Mount Sinai when he brought down the written Torah. Then there's the derived oral Torah. So it's not written clearly, but it's written in the Torah by in a hinting way, and through the 13 principles that we spoke about last week, the 13 rules, we're able to derive that this is what God wanted of us. And now we have the third category of written Torah, which is the legislated Torah. These are essentially new laws, rabbinic laws, things that the rabbis came ahead and told us from now on, you should do such and such. Okay, now this is, I think, the greatest category of oral Torah, which people have a hard time with. And simply because, why should we be listening to rabbis? Why should we be listening to human beings? You want to tell me to listen to God, that's one thing, but to go ahead and listen to another human being, who gave them that right? Where is the democracy? And kind of like, what makes it right and wrong? And I think especially these days, we have especially a hard time listening to authority, perhaps because we, in our day and age, are privy to a lot of the behind the scenes of authority. So when you know what someone really is about, when you know what went behind, that a lot of many legislations may be corrupt. There may be just other factors that would cause someone to create a legislation. So you start saying, like, why should I listen to you? This is not right. So what I want to do in today's lesson is hopefully give a little bit of the behind the scenes of what goes behind creating a legislation. And when we see that, perhaps we will gain a little bit more respect for what the legislation consists of and why we should be listening to it. Okay. Before we do that, I want to discuss something else. And that is, so does God care that I should be following the rabbis? That's a good question. So we have the oral Torah that's received, we have the oral Torah that's derived. All of that is from God. But then there's the legislation, which is not from God, it's from the rabbis. Does God care that I should be listening to him? So again, this goes back to the previous example that I gave, which is, Congress makes legislation and they say follow the FDA. Congress cares that you should follow the FDA. But then there's much more to it. And that is that as a Jew that believes in God and believes that God runs the world perfectly, we understand, and we'll get more to this later in the class, but we understand that God figures out exactly how he wants to his message to get across. And just like there are certain things that God chose to write clearly in the Bible, there are things that God chose to tell Moses on Mount Sinai. And then there are things that God chose to hint to in the Bible, and we derived it. And we understand that all three of those categories are from God, just different ways of God wanting us to get to the same place. Equally, God chose a fourth venue of allowing his will to be expressed. And that is by saying, listen to the rabbis will do it. And throughout history, we'll see some examples. There are times the rabbis wanted to enact something and it didn't end up happening for whatever reason. And what that shows us is that God didn't want it to happen. And when it does happen, that means this is what God wants it to happen. As the Psalm says in Psalm 82, David says, among the judges, it is he who renders judgment. So when God says, follow the judges, he wasn't saying, unfortunately, I cannot personally judge you, so listen to the judges. What he was saying is, I'm great enough to run my people through human beings, and that my will happen through these rabbis. Okay. So that's regarding God caring. Now let's go back to, let us get a little bit of a sneak peek into some of the enactments that happen over the years and what goes behind these enactments. So what we're going to do is something a little fun. I'm going to ask you to turn to page 77 in your booklet. And I have over here on page 77, 78, and 79, I have 3 cases in history where rabbis had to step in and help. So what I'm going to do in each of these cases, I'm going to tell you the case, and I'm going to ask you if you were the rabbi at the time, if you were the Jewish leader at the time, is there an enactment that you would make based on these circumstances? And when someone does suggest an enactment, I'm going to ask you, when someone does suggest an enactment, I'm going to ask you if you have any reason not to make that enactment. Because every time you make an enactment, there's something that it takes away from. You know, there's going to be a down point there. And then we are going to have a vote in terms of should we accept this enactment or not. So we over here, I think hello, Adi, welcome. Hello, Justine, good to see you. So we are, there's I think 8 of us here. So we are going to be the court in deciding the situations. The first one is a case of pirates. So case number 1, it's the 1st century of the Common Era, and pirate activity on the Mediterranean is rampant. In addition to the plunder of personal property, the pirates sell the passengers and seamen into slavery. Representatives of Jewish communities around the Mediterranean endeavor to buy captive Jews in order to set them free. The pirates offer demand that the Jews pay higher prices than what they usually charge slave buyers. Okay, so I'm going to pause there and explain the dilemma. I'm going to ask you if you were the rabbi, if we're a judicial system, what would you say? So the problem was that there is an obligation for Jews to help each other, and the greatest way of helping someone is what's called redeeming a captive. So we're a Jewish community, and pirates show up one day, and they have among their slaves, they have a Jewish slave. And now we have an obligation to redeem the slave. So right away, we create a charity fund, we create a GoFundMe, and we collect the money among everyone. Maybe it's a tax, maybe the richer give more, whatever it might be, depending on the community, and everyone contributes, and we redeem the slave. The pirates realized that the Jewish people always redeem their brothers, no matter what. So they say, you know what? If that's the case, if it's a higher commodity, we're going to sell it for more. We might even look for Jews to capture because Jews have a better resale. You know, it's a bigger market. It's an easier market. So if you are the rabbi, you are the judge, you're the leader of the generation, how do you deal with this issue? Any suggestions?
I'm not hearing the decision point. Like
Okay, so
they stole Jews, they stole, right? The pirates, they came, they stole. They're asking for money. So what's the question? Do we pay the money? Do we not pay the money? Is that the question?
that could be a question.
I mean,
That
it's
could be a question.
illegal. It's illegal. You can't do that.
But they did it.
But they did it.
And we're in this situation. So what's the question that we're supposed to be answering? Or are we supposed to ask questions?
Well, there's a dilemma. It's not about a question, it's a dilemma. So the Jewish people are in a problem that we are constantly giving away money and we don't even have the money to give away. So ultimately, these people are asking for ridiculous prices, and the Jewish people who don't have money are being forced to sell their cow and sell their sheep to be able to redeem this, their brother. And meanwhile, this prices are just going higher and higher because we're bending our back.
Hmm. So is this where we start asking questions about?
So I'm just asking it does anyone have any suggestions as the leader of the generation, how to deal with this issue?
I mean, you have no choice. You have to buy back, you have to redeem the Jew. So we have no choice.
There's nothing to do about it.
You exchange, but could you change the exchange rate so it's not so attractive and expensive?
How do we do that?
I don't know. I'm trying to just think of ideas first.
We sell all of our sheep and cattle and we buy back the Jew. That's it.
But it's just going, that's just going to, that's just going to,
We're still taking Jews.
yeah, that's just gonna,
Goes
market
on forever.
I mean, we didn't have the United Nations back then, although I'm not sure how good the United Nations does today. But I mean, surely there has to be a group of people that could get together and fight this.
No, that's not,
That's just not,
talking about that, yeah, I don't think that's a practical thing.
Okay.
Okay, so that's one example. I'll give you another two examples.
What
So,
about, Rabbi,
yes,
is, is there no possibility that the Jewish community could overpower the pirates and put an end to the pirates who happen to be in town that week? And then word gets around that if you stop at this port wanting to take advantage of the Jewish community, then you're gonna end up with a big problem.
that might be the case. The fact that it never happened tells me that it wasn't really possible. We didn't have the Israeli army at the time, and you're talking about pirates that fought, armies that were greater than ours. And the fact that the local authorities didn't do that tells me that it wasn't so simple. Because these
There
were
are stories, there are stories that a great many of the pirates were Jewish, in fact.
okay. Interesting. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go to the next case. So we're on page 78. And this is an unfortunate story in the Tanakh, in the prophets, where during the lifetime of King David, so David's son, whose name was Amnon, developed this feeling for his half sister, and he wanted to lay with her. And he pretended to be sick, and he asked his half sister Tamar to prepare and bring him food to help him because he wasn't feeling well, supposedly. And then when they were alone, he raped her. And the end of the story is that Avshalom, which was Tamar's brother and Amnon's half brother, went ahead and murdered Amnon for doing that act against his sister. So basically, in other words, we now encountered for the first time, as far as we're concerned in terms of our history, the issue of rape among the Jewish people. And the question is there anyone here that could suggest, as a rabbi, a leader of the generation, a way of making sure that doesn't happen again? Making sure that that doesn't happen again.
I mean, we had the incident in Bereshit with Dinah when she was captured.
Okay, but that's a different situation, because in that situation, there's nothing really to do. I guess you could also talk about that, but in that situation, Dinah, first of all, it was a non-Jew who raped her, so someone that wouldn't be listening to our rules. And so, like, what are you gonna say? Dinah shouldn't leave her house. Women should never leave the house. I think that's a little bit intense, but that's something that we might be able to say in that case, and maybe in this case as well. So let's just go with these thought process. I know you didn't suggest this, but I'm just going with that thought process. Perhaps the rabbi should go ahead and say girls should never leave their house. They should stay indoors with their family, and then they'll be safe. I think most people here will argue that that's not practical, and the cons of that enactment outweigh the pros.
So that's why the laws of tznius
Okay, so
only should be with women and men only with men.
Yeah, but she could have been sneistic and he was still not good. I mean,
okay, so, I
Well,
mean,
you could say that that a woman alone should not be with a man, that she would have to be with other women to serve him.
oh,
again, say that again.
When they're
A
alone,
woman alone
right?
would not come to serve a man.
So David is
It would have to
suggesting
be more than one.
that since this story of rape happened, and it happened essentially because they were alone, so let us enact an enactment that that men and women should never be alone, one man with one woman. And perhaps, right, David, you're saying that there should be at least two women with one man and two men with one woman. Would you allow two men with one woman?
No,
Also not. Three men with one woman?
depends on,
Always, no
No matter how many men,
matter. There always must be two
there has to
women.
be two women. What if one of the men's wives is what if that one woman is one of the wives of one of those men? Does
I'd
that
say
allow it?
no.
Also not. Okay, interesting. Is everyone in favor of this enactment?
No.
No, you're not in favor of this enactment. BA.
No, because it reminds me, on one hand, of some of the positive changes that the Boy Scouts made in terms of you couldn't be alone, you couldn't be in these situations and things like that. But on the other hand, put it into another situation where I go out to dinner with a couple and I can't be friends with them unless I'm also with another woman or another man. I mean, a
why
woman
is
or
that?
a man.
Why is
And that's
that?
like kind of like so if you take that scenario that you want to,
But you're going to a
I mean,
place.
you want to apply law to something to protect, but you have to look at it for all the, like, for other scenarios too,
Right.
to say, is it
So
impacting something else?
Why
so
couldn't
what
you go with the other couple?
so what
Because
BA
I'd be
is
alone with a man and a woman.
So what
Well,
BA
that's
is
okay, there's
saying,
two
and hold on one
women.
second, I'm just going to sum up the point. So what BA is saying is that at the end of the day, there is going to be cons to this enactment, as there will be to any enactment, which is, let's say you have an elderly guy and he needs help at home, and the only person to help him will be a nurse, and that nurse is a female, and that's the only option. He doesn't have any other options. So does that mean that he's not allowed to have help at home? Right?
Well,
That's an example. And the point being, and David, you might argue with that. The point being, what I'm trying to show you is that there's two sides to every situation, to every question, and always the question will be, first of all, what are the details of the question? Because we just showed in this simple enactment how there's so many details, and how every single point has to be taken apart. What if it's two men? What if it's three men? What if it's five men? 100 men? What if one is the wife? What if it's an old elderly guy, an elderly woman? Does that change things? Is there cameras? Do cameras change things? There's going to be so many questions that we are going to have to figure out if we want to enact something like that. And the enactment itself is going to be saying that we see that the pro outweighs the con. Okay, I'm going to now move on to the third case. And that third case is a general case, it's not a specific time, which is that it seems to be that people are starting to be very busy with their daily struggles, and they're not properly prepared for the holidays, as well as they don't necessarily properly know the laws that the holidays consist of. So holidays come, it's very exciting, but people haven't prepared properly. They were overwhelmed with other things, and they haven't got around to getting their lulav and getting their etrog and building the sukkah and preparing the matzah and cleaning the house. And in addition, they haven't sat down and really reviewed the laws, which every holiday consists of many laws, and we cannot expect people to remember from year to year. This is the final case. Does anyone want to suggest some sort of advice on how we should be dealing with this issue, or we should just let it be?
What's the issue? That they're surprised about the halacha before the holiday and they just left?
Well, I guess the issue is two. Number one, people are unprepared.
Mhm.
So they're busy with everything else and they just don't prepare properly.
Mhm.
And number two is they don't know the laws.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the ability to have a mentor, during especially, prior to these holidays, that they should always have a mentor, somebody to say, oh, by the way, this is what we do now. We start preparing this and this because on this day, we will not be able to use electricity. We have to treat it like Shabbos, and somebody to explain.
So you're saying that every individual person has to have a mentor who keeps them in check. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, not to keep them in check, but sort of like, just that to explain what they know.
But what you're suggesting is that people should have, every single person individually must make sure to have an individual rabbi, someone
I
that's
hope,
going.
but I don't know if everybody holds by that. So I don't know. But I'm suggesting that.
Well,
Yeah.
the question is, if you are the rabbi of the community, is this what you would legislate? Is this something that you would say everyone must do? And, is that something that we could expect of people?
I think the less knowledgeable, yes, they should have this. I think those that have, gone through textbook procedures since birth, then no, they don't need, because they know.
Interesting. Okay. So what I'm going to do, David, yes.
I think it's each person's responsibility and choice to keep the holiday as they see fit. And they shouldn't be judged by their neighbors if they're not as
So
strict.
it's definitely not about judgment. What I think it's about, and we'll get to this later as well. But you know what? Hold on to that thought. I'll get back to that. It's definitely not about judgment, but we'll get back to that, David. Okay, so what I want to do now is just revisit these three examples and tell you what the rabbis have done in the past generations. So when it came to the situation with the pirates, and we had this issue that Jews became a target. People were literally going ahead and capturing Jews because Jews were more valuable. And the Jewish people could not sustain it because the price was just going up. Therefore, the rabbis enacted that we do not redeem captives for more than they're worth. So there became a regular slave, whatever this normal slave prices are of a non-Jew, they would have to be on par. And if someone showed up and said, I'm charging more for a Jew, we would not redeem that Jew.
Oh.
Right? So we're forcing the captors to take down their prices. Now, on the other hand, what this does is it absolutely puts an issue for the captive that's currently captive. And there are situations where it's going to be unfortunate that we will not be able to redeem that captive. Yet, what the rabbis chose is they felt that the need of the public is more important than the need of the individual. And when we say public, we mean that in two senses. Number one, the public in terms of this individual suffering, but the monetary strain is a strain on the entire community. And number two, which is probably more important, that when we go out of our way to redeem Jews, it creates a future security concern for the entire Jewish nation. So by redeeming this one Jew, you're putting all the Jews in jeopardy. Now, the question will obviously be, well, what if that Jew is in a life or death situation? That might be different. What if that Jew is very valuable to us specifically for whatever reason? That might be different. And these questions are obviously going to be many details that we will have to deal with when enacting such a decree. But the point being is that there was such a decree enacted that generally we don't redeem for more than their value. Let's say going now to the situation in Gaza, a situation where there are captives, this becomes a great debate where the question is, should we go ahead and redeem the captives for more than their value when you're saving a life, yet at the same time, you are putting many, many things in jeopardy, including the general security of Israel, including the esteem of Israel, and including more captives in the future. Jewish people become a target. So on the other hand, you're talking about life and death. So this is obviously a huge question beyond the scope of this discussion. It's another JLI class entirely, and it actually is a JLI class, which is available, but it's not going to be for today's course, but just an interesting point. Okay, so that would go under the category of tikkun olam, meaning this sort of enactment is not one that has to do with the Torah. It's one that has to do with the Jewish community. That the Jewish community should be a healthy community. We have to enact certain rules to sustain it. But then there are a different type of enactment, and that is based on the verse. And the verse says that God said, "You shall safeguard my charge. You shall build fences." God commanded the leaders of the Jewish people to create fences to the Torah. So God said, "Keep Shabbat," and then God told the rabbis, "Make fences so Jewish people will ensure to keep Shabbat." And as time goes on, there's need for more fences, for more safeguards. Why is that? Why is there a need for more safeguards? Simply because the world becomes a darker place. We become less vigilant, less aware of godliness. In the times of the temple, when God was visible, the fact that a Jew would listen to what God wants of him and not, go after his heart, his or her heart, is something which was much more sustainable. And as time went on, Jewish people became more lax, which made the need to put more safeguards, more fences to ensure that we do the right thing. Now, I want to go to David's question now, which was, David said, well, why don't you just live and let live? If a Jew doesn't want to listen, then they're not going to listen, and that's fine. And just let them do what they want to do. So I think the big point over here, which we have to understand, we have to recognize, is if we're asking a question on the importance of a fence, God said to keep Shabbat. Why would you tell me more than that? God just didn't say more than that. He just said keep Shabbat. He didn't say not to do muksa, if you know what that is. So what's the importance of a fence? And the answer is, if we don't recognize the importance of a mitzvah, then we don't value the importance of a fence. But if we value the importance of a mitzvah, then we will value the fence. And I'll give you a simple example. So there's no texting and driving. And I think everyone here believes that texting while driving is a bad thing to do. But is it actually a bad thing to do? There's nothing wrong with texting while driving. What's wrong is crashing someone. So as long as I didn't crash someone or hurt someone or hurt someone's property, there's nothing wrong with me. So why is the cop pulling me over and saying you were texting while driving? I'm giving you a ticket. The cop should say, live and let live. As long as the guy didn't bump the other person, as long as the guy didn't do the wrong thing, that's going to be. David, hold on 1 second. Hold your horses. Give me 1 second. So texting while driving, there's nothing wrong with texting while driving. What's wrong is hitting someone. But since hitting someone is really wrong, so everyone understands that texting while driving is also wrong. And therefore, it makes sense to make an enactment to say everyone has to listen to this. If you hit someone, you're wrong. If you texted while you're driving, you're wrong already, because that's a fence to make sure that we're not going to hit someone. And the reason why you value that is because you value the problem of hitting someone. As a Jewish person, we value the Torah. And if God said, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not kill, do not desecrate the Shabbos, those things become inherently value and much more important than not hitting someone on the highway. And therefore, we must make sure to put fences if there is a fear that we will not be able to sustain that. Okay, so that would go into a second category, which is called Tikkun Hadat. So there is Tikkun Olam, we're fixing the society, and then there's Tikkun Hadat, we are creating a fence for our religion. David, you seem to have a question.
Well, it's not so much a question as I disagree. I think that when you're violating what seems like an obvious law that can harm another person, there is a need for there to be a fence or regulation. But if I choose to keep Shabbat in a different way than others, in a way that doesn't hurt them, then there's nothing wrong with my doing that.
Unless you were created with a purpose, unless the whole purpose of creation is to bring godliness into this world, and by going against that purpose of creation, we are actually violating the whole purpose of existence of this world. So again, it goes back to the value of a mitzvah, right? So that's the point over here. That's the point. If we value the value of a mitzvah, if we understand what a mitzvah really is all about, we will value the safeguards. Okay, so on the flip side, I think this is important to bring out. The question becomes, okay, so if that's the case, if a mitzvah is so valuable, so then just put endless amount of safeguards. Put endless amount of fences. On Shabbos we should just have to sit in a chair and do nothing in case we might violate the Shabbat. And why was it that it took time over the generations for various enactments to happen? And I think this goes back to the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So God says, don't eat from the tree. And what did Eve say? God said, don't touch the tree, because she was trying to be more religious than God, putting up a fence. I'm not only not going to eat it, but I'm not going to touch it. And when the snake pushed her and she realized that she could touch the tree, she was like, well, if I could touch it, I could eat it. And that's what ended up messing her over. And the reason why that was a mistake, to say God said don't touch the tree, even though God didn't say that, is for two reasons. Number one, because she's not just putting on a fence, but she's actually saying that God said to do it, and God didn't say to do it. So you could say, I'm not going to touch it because God said not to eat it. But understand that that's a human fence that you put up. What Eve did was she claimed this is a godly thing. God said don't touch it. And that's where she messed up. A second point where she messed up was she wasn't in need of such a fence. And since she wasn't in need of such a fence, then to go ahead and say, I'm not going to touch it, was a sin. At the end of the day, God wants us to deal with this world and to elevate the world, which consists of being in this world and being part of it and doing worldly things. And therefore, we're not going to run to put up a fence unless we need to, because as long as something is okay, then on the contrary, we should be dealing with it. We should be doing it. because that's part of Tikkun Olam, it's part of elevating this world and bringing godliness into this world. Only when we realize this is an actual issue, that in our generation we came to a place that, let's say, a man and a woman being together in seclusion is now dangerous, even though in the past it wasn't. But we realize that society has changed and now it is dangerous. That's when we'll come ahead and say no men and women should be together secluded. And that brings me to the second situation, which was the situation of the rape. And the rabbis, indeed, similar to what we've said, enacted a decree that a man should never be secluded with an unmarried woman. Now, the reason why it says unmarried is because a man being secluded with a married woman was already a previous enactment, something that was done many years before. At this point in time, the rabbis came and said that the prohibition is not only for a married woman, but it's even for an unmarried woman. And again, there's many, many details to that enactment. It's way beyond the scope of this lecture. There's books written about this. It goes into every single detail, every single situation. But the point is that the presence of others acts as a deterrent, and the seclusion of a male and female creates a subtle degree of bonding. So the rabbi is recognizing that being alone with the opposite sex creates a certain attraction, and recognizing that one other person in the room also creates a deterrence to any thoughts that are not appropriate. They said that no man and woman should be alone in seclusion at any given point, which is why if I'll go to someone's house and there's a woman there, even if it's an elderly woman and we're alone, I'll ask them to keep the door open, or something like that. So to make sure that we're not in seclusion. And there are many, many details to this law. And again, I'm not going to go into all those details right now.
So
Finally,
how do young couples, how do they date then?
that's a very good question. It's a very good question. So in a religious circle,
Yeah.
Young couples will go to public places, right? So we'll go to a hotel lobby, we'll go to a game place, we'll go to various places. When I was dating, there was a point that I wanted to take my wife to an escape the room, which is in a sense a seclusion. And I went ahead and asked the rabbi if that would be okay. And I was told that it is okay since there are cameras and the door is always open and there's someone that we know is always watching us, because that's how escape the rooms work. So there is no problem in that situation. And every situation would have to be dealt with accordingly. There's definitely, a point not to be driving alone too late at night on streets that wouldn't be busy, for the same reason, because, we don't believe anyone is bad. We're not thinking that anyone has bad intentions, but at the end of the day, we all have, animalistic instincts, and being secluded could create a certain bonding, and we want to make sure that there's a deterrence. Finally, going to the third example that we gave in terms of the holidays. So the early sages enacted that lecturers should begin to publicly teach the laws of the holiday 30 days before the holiday begins. So there's an enactment that there be a crash course 30 days before the holiday on the laws of the holiday. And many of you might be familiar with what's called the Shabbos HaGadol. That's the Shabbos before Passover. And it was called Shabbos HaGadol for many reasons. And one of them is because there was a great speech the rabbi would give on that Shabbos. And what that speech consisted of was the laws of Passover. So people would come to shul in the afternoon for like an hour and a half, and the rabbi would go through all the pertaining laws that one must know for Passover, so people remember them and people are aware of them. Interestingly enough, when it says the early sages, does anyone want to give a guess how early this is? Who was the sage or sages that enacted this enactment? Okay, so the answer is Moses, right? So the earliest sage that could have possibly enacted anything, aside from giving us the Torah and explaining the Torah, also made certain enactments. One of them being this one, that rabbis should say the rules 30 days prior to the holiday. There's another there's a number of enactments that Moses made, including Shiva. So the concept of Shiva is not a biblical concept. It's an enactment from the rabbis, namely Moses, as well as Sheva brachas. So the fact that we celebrate a fresh bride and groom for 7 days with festivities is also an enactment from Moses, as well as the first blessing of the benching. So we know that benching, the grace after meals, is biblical. It says in the Torah that when you eat and you're satiated, you should bless God. But Moses felt that just saying that itself wouldn't be enough because people wouldn't have the words to bless God. They wouldn't be able to come up with the proper words every single time. And therefore, Moses made a blessing. Moses wrote a blessing for himself, and he said, this is what people should say after they finish eating. That was an enactment from Moses, and Joshua added a blessing to that, and then David added a blessing to that, which makes up the entire grace after the meals that we have today. So those are a few examples of enactments from Moses. What do we have next? Okay, so this is going to be a quick video, which is going to tell us another example of an enactment that happened at some point of history, being the need for it, being that there was a need for it.
Have you ever wondered, if polygamy is forbidden in Jewish law, why did some of our biblical ancestors have more than one wife? For example, our forefather Jacob had 4 wives, while King David is said to have had 6. When the Jewish people received the Torah, they received instructions pertaining to all areas of life, including marriage. The Torah did not, however, forbid polygamy. The prohibition against a man having more than one wife is a relatively recent innovation in Jewish law. Who enacted this law, and why? Rabbeinu Gershom ben Yehuda was the spiritual leader of the Ashkenazi Jewish community at the beginning of the 11th century. Around the year 1000, he convened an assembly of leading rabbis who issued various enactments, including a declaration prohibiting polygamy. Although polygamy had always been rare in the Jewish community, these rabbis felt it should never be allowed. In biblical and Talmudic times, polygamy had a role to play. In those eras, emphasis was often placed on the social and economic aspect of marriage. In this context, polygamy could offer practical financial advantages. For example, in an agricultural society, a farmer needed many children to work the land and protect it against bandits. If a woman were barren or had few children, the farm could not survive. In such situations, polygamy provided security for women and enabled economic survival. However, in Rabbi Gershom's Europe, as the Jews moved away from an agrarian society, the reasons for tolerating polygamy disappeared. In addition, as poverty and deprivation intensified for the German Jewish community, people were unable to sustain multiple wives and their children. Thus, even when viewed through the lens of economics, polygamy would now cause more harm than good. Taking this into account, as well as the fact that there were always disadvantages to polygamy, such as abuse of women and familial strife, Rabbeinu Gershom chose to eliminate polygamy. Monogamy was always considered the ideal in Judaism. Rabbi Gershom's ban led the Jewish people to the marital ideal, where under the huppah, a man and a woman are reunited as 2 halves of one whole.
Okay. At this point in time, we discover an aspect to this whole conversation, which is we kind of, I think, see the need for legislations, and we saw some of the background of some of these legislations. What we didn't talk about is that there are rules for these legislations. There are rules for the rabbis that they must follow. There are certain things the rabbis are not allowed to do, and they're not allowed to say, they're not allowed to enact. We are going to discuss 2 of these limitations, 2 of these rules. We're not going to go into all of them. And those two are as follows. So number one, it says in the Bible, you shall not add to the word that I command you. And this is a clear law towards the rabbis that anytime that they make an enactment, they cannot say this is what God said to do. So they're not saying this is a biblical mitzvah. They're saying this is what the sages are saying to do. They're not adding to the word of God. It also means they can't change a mitzvah. So they can't say that until now you were putting on, it's tefillin with 4 boxes, and now you're going to put tefillin on with 5 boxes. They cannot change the way God set up the Torah. In addition, there happens to be many differences between biblical law and rabbinic law. One of those differences would be that in a situation where there is doubt whether something is prohibited, if the prohibition is rabbinic, then we would go lenient. And if the prohibition is biblical, we would be more strict. That's a very general sentence that I just said, but that's the general guideline. I'm just trying to bring out how there's differences. Another difference would be when it comes to an unwell person, someone that's sick. So doing something that's biblically prohibited for a sick person to help them is not allowed unless it's a situation of life and death. If it's life and death, if it could be life and death, then we would go ahead and do that thing, although it's prohibited. When it comes to rabbinic law, many times, very often, usually, the rabbis allowed rabbinic law to be compromised, even for an illness which is not life and death. Which is again another example of where there's a difference between rabbinic law and biblical law.
Rabbi, your voice went off. Turn your voice back on.
My voice went off?
Oh, I hear you.
You hear me? Okay.
I heard you.
Okay, perfect. Another example of a rule that the rabbis have to follow is that we do not issue a decree unless the majority of the public can stand by it. So anytime the rabbis wish to issue a decree, they have to evaluate the people and see if this will be accepted. An example of this is after the destruction of the Holy Temple, the rabbis wished to commemorate the destruction by prohibiting any consumption of meat and wine. Mm-hmm. But they felt that that's something which would not be accepted by the majority of people, by the public, and therefore they did not do that. They did enact the fast of Tisha B'Av and not eating meat and wine during the 9 days leading up to Tisha B'Av. There is another point which is added to this, which is that not only could they not enact something that will not be accepted by the public, but even if they do enact it and the public end up rejecting it, it is void. Now, we have to be very careful here, because if the public accepted and then many generations later it's unaccepted, that doesn't change the enactment. The point being is that initially, when it's initially decreed by the rabbis or enacted by the rabbis, it must be initially accepted by the public in order to be a valid decree. An example where something like this happened was, we know that there were many decrees regarding relationships between Jews and non-Jews, which consisted of various reasons, including intermarriage, trying to avoid intermarriage. And one of them, for example, one of them consists of not eating a meal that was privately prepared by a non-Jew, which is why if you go into a kosher restaurant, the non-Jewish chef will always have a Jewish person there that will turn on the oven or will do something that's part of the cooking, because if it's a private individual that's preparing the food, that creates a certain closeness to the consumer, and to mitigate lessen, and the word's not coming to me today, but to lessen intermarriage, we created this enactment that we should not be having private meals prepared by non-Jews. One of the examples where something similar was decreed was Daniel. So I think most of us are familiar with Daniel the prophet, Daniel that was thrown into the pit with the lions and survived. Daniel was the advisor of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia. So he was the leader of the generation at his time, the Jewish people at his time, and he said that people should not consume oil that belonged to non-Jews. So there was something called kosher oil, and he wished that the Jewish people should only use oil made by Jews, and that was something that wasn't accepted. It simply did not go. People didn't listen, and eventually it was understood that this is not something which is valid, and therefore, if you open up a code of Jewish law today, you'll see that there's a rule about not having non-Jewish bread, but there is no rule about not having non-Jewish oil. There's no such thing these days. Okay. Fine. Any questions before we continue? Okay. So what we are going to do now is discover a new category, which is the concept of customs. So until now, we spoke about the received Torah, the derived Torah, the legislated laws by the rabbis. And then there's a concept of customs. Customs are not legislation. Customs are not something that was created by the rabbis. Customs are something that people accepted upon themselves, whether it's communities, whether it's families, whether it's the entire Jewish nation. And this became part of our relationship with God, part of our service of God. So there's the famous joke that there was the woman preparing the Passover brisket, and her teenage daughter was watching her as she cut off the ends of the brisket. And she said, "Mom, why do you cut off the ends of the brisket?" And she said, "I don't know. That's what my mother did." So they go back to her mother and they say, "Well, why do you cut off the edges of the brisket?" And she said, "That's true, but I don't know why. That's what my mother did." So sure enough, they go and they ask the great-grandmother who's sitting in the old age home, and she says, I don't know why you guys do it, but I did it because my pan was too small. So obviously there's many jokes about this, and that's not what we mean when we say Jewish customs, but a Jewish custom is something that is done in terms of service of God. We feel like this is something that will bring us closer to God. I want to give an example. So turn to page 91 with me. We are going to be reading text number 17, and it reads as follows. So this is the Talmud. The Talmud tells us that the citizens of Beishan had the custom not to go from Tyre to Sidon on Friday. Their children went to Rabbi Yochanan and said to him, "For our ancestors this was possible. For us it is impossible." Said he to them, "Your fathers have already taken the stringency upon themselves, and it says, 'Hear, my child, the instructions of your father, and forsake not the teaching of your mother.'" So the story is that the story over here is that Sidon had their market day on Friday. But since the market day was on Friday, people wouldn't properly prepare for Shabbos because Friday became a very, very busy day. So the people of Baishon felt that it would be appropriate to have a custom that we don't go to the market in Sidon, which is on Friday. Generations later, the people of Baishon came to the rabbi and said, our ancestors were wealthy. They were able to not go to the market on Friday, but we don't have those means, and we feel like we should start going to the market. We should abolish this custom. To which the rabbi said, customs have real value. God writes, listen to your ancestors, follow your mothers. And the Rabbi would mention this, that even the songs that customarily mothers sing to their children as they're going to sleep has holiness, has value, because customs in Judaism have real value, which we'll talk about a little bit more shortly. Obviously, a custom cannot go against halacha, cannot go against Jewish law. And here is a few examples of various customs that you might be aware of. So one of them is the wedding ring. In Jewish law, to be able to marry a woman, to wed a woman, you do not have to give a ring. You have to give something of value. It could be anything. It could be $1. It could be a house. It could be a car. It could be a dress. Customarily, the Jewish people over the generations, for many reasons, took on that it's a ring, and this became the custom of the Jewish people. Another example would be Rosh Hashanah, dipping the apple in the honey. Yom Kippur, wearing white. So the men wear white on Yom Kippur, that's a custom. Simchas Torah, dancing with the Torah on Sukkot, is a custom. This became a holiday for itself, but there's no biblical source for it. And not only is there no biblical source, it's not even rabbinic. It's simply a custom that was created over the generations, starting roughly from the time of the Arizal. Lighting, how we light the menorah. So this is an interesting one. Lighting the menorah is a rabbinic decree that we light the menorah on Hanukkah. Now, in terms of how we light the menorah, there's different ways of doing it. You could light one candle and that's enough. Every night you light one candle. One of the ways of doing it, which is how we do it, is that every night we add a candle. And not only that, but everyone uses their individual menorah. So every person gets their own menorah and they add and add and add. That's not part of the decree. The fact that we do that is a custom. The fact that we all took on that way of fulfilling the mitzvah is a custom. Costumes on Purim, not eating legumes for Ashkenazim, right? Not eating rice on Passover is a custom. It's not something which is even a rabbinic decree. It's a custom that was accepted by the Ashkenazim, by the Ashkenazi part of Jews. And dairy on Shavuot, right? So Shavuot, the giving of the Torah, there's a custom to eat dairy. That's not a rabbinic decree. There's no amount that you're supposed to eat. There's just simply a custom to do that. So what we discovered just now is we actually have our fourth category of oral Torah. So there is the received Torah, which was given to us by Moses. There's the derived Torah, which God hints to in the Torah. There's the legislated laws that the rabbis enacted over the generations. And then there are the customs, the things that Jewish communities have taken on throughout the generations. What I want to do now is talk about the Kabbalah behind these four aspects of Judaism. They're not just technical. And as I've mentioned in the past, when the fact that God made these four different types of oral Torah they're not man-made. God planned this. God wanted this. And there's a reason for that. What's the reason for that? So the answer is, I'm going to revisit something that we've spoken about in the past, and I've made mention of it, is going back to the purpose of creation. God created the world because he wanted a dwelling place for himself in this world. And ultimately, the way that happens is by bringing godliness into this world. How does God come into this world? So God gave us a Torah. And the Torah is holy. God put himself into the Torah. And when God said, when you use the mikvah, when you put on tefillin, when you keep kosher, when you keep Shabbos, you're bringing godliness into this world. You're listening to me, and therefore you're bringing godliness into this world. The question is, how do we create a bridge between God and man? And we've spoken about this in a previous class. Something which is purely God initiated, God commands, it's very much holy. It's very little human. It's very divine, very not human. We're just simply listening to what God told us to do. And therefore, God created a system where there's actually four types of oral Torah, four types of the mitzvahs that we do for God. And each one of these types are bringing godliness more and more into our world, making it less divine and more human. So if we're going to talk about these four categories, we talk about the written Torah being very divine and not so human. If you talk about the received Torah, it's a little less divine, a little more human. When we talk about, because we're the ones that are upholding it, when we talk about the derived Torah, so that's literally something that God wrote in the Torah, but we're the ones that derive it. That makes it more human, a little less divine. And then you have the legislated, which is even more human. And then finally you have the customary, which is extremely human. This allows the Torah to be a proper bridge between God and humanity, God and physicality, which actually underscores the importance of a custom, even in a way, even more than a biblical commandment. To bring that out, I want you to turn to page 94. So let's go to page 94, text number 19, and we have over here a quote from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe writes as follows: God's ultimate intention is for us to make this world into a home for God through our own effort and initiative. Although this is accomplished through all of Torah and mitzvot, this accomplishment is most apparent when we observe Jewish customs, inasmuch as they are not commandments from above, but initiated entirely by the Jewish people. So in a sense, when we talk about bringing God into the world, bringing God into our lives, when we take on a custom which is not biblical, in a sense, we're bringing God more into our life than following God's commandment. Another way of looking at this is as follows. So when you talk about love, there's 3 stages of love. There's when someone fulfills your expressed desire. There's when someone fulfills your implied desire. And then there's someone that senses what your desire is and follows it without you even asking. And essentially that really goes into the various types of enactments of mitzvahs. So there are those things that God asked us to do. There are those things that God implied for us to do. And then there's the things that God said, I'm not going to even ask you. I'm not going to even imply it. But you're going, if you do it, that will be the greatest show of love. Okay, so we essentially now reached the end of our class. And to finish the class, I'm going to do a quick game with you. And that is that I'm going to talk about some of the things from the Passover Seder. And I'm going to have you guess whether that thing is received, meaning it's either written in the Torah and explained by Moses, or Moses told it to us on Mount Sinai, or it was derived from the Torah, or is it legislation, or it's a custom. So you could unmute yourself, and as the different things pop up, you could give a shout out what you think it is, and then we'll discover what it actually is. So starting with the Seder plate. We know we have a Seder plate about the Seder. Is that received, derived, legislated, or customary?
Legislated?
No one?
Customary.
Received?
Customary, very good. It's customary. What about the 4 cups of wine?
Derived.
Legislated. It doesn't say anywhere to have 4 cups of wine. We legislated it because of certain things that are written in the Torah, because it's 4 languages of freedom, but it's legislated. Thank you, David, for being brave and guessing. What's the reclining? Where does, we recline by the Seder? Is that received, derived, legislated, or customary?
Received.
So that is also legislated. These are great things because we end up realizing like how much we do that's legislated. Vegetable dipped in salt water. Is that received, derived, legislated, or customary?
Customary?
Legislated.
All right.
Hiding the afikoman. Is that received, derived, legislated, or customary?
My mother made it up.
Customary. Very good.
Yay.
Retelling the story of Exodus. Is that
Received.
Very good. That's received. The 4 sons.
Derived?
Very good.
Yeah.
Washing your hands before matzah.
Received?
No,
It seems
that's Torah, right? You always wash your
Torah.
hands before the bread, right?
So that's actually, I told you that at the beginning of the class, because I mentioned that I mentioned 3 blessings at the beginning of the class that we say, thank you, God, for commanding us to do. And one of them was washing your hands. And I asked, why would we say that if it's legislated? So so that's the answer to that question. Washing
Legislated,
our
okay.
hands are all legislated. In general, washing hands, because it comes from the temple, the Kohanim in the temple would wash their hands, and the rabbis enacted that we wash our hands from then on every time we eat bread. Eating matzah.
Received.
Received.
Torah.
Very good.
Yeah.
How much matzah should we eat?
Oh.
The amount of matzah. There's an amount of matzah that we're supposed to eat.
There
We're supposed to
is.
eat- Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. This
It's
is
made up by the matzah companies.
It's actually, if it was up to them, they would tell us much, much more. It's the amount that you could fit into a small matchbox. In your average matzah, it's a weight thing. So in your average matzah, it's going to be about a quarter of a matzah. But that's actually received. Something that Moses told us on how much matzah we should be eating. What about Hillel sandwich? To eat the matzah and the maror and the paschal lamb sacrifice all together. Is that something which is received?
Customary.
So it's legislated. Okay, very good. Eating an egg. What is that?
I just want to say, for those who went to Jewish day school, you make me feel very good when you get it wrong. Thank you, Adi. Adi, I'm always like, yeah, at least if you don't know it, I feel good that I.
Mara and I were cutting class. No, I'm kidding.
Sorry.
So we have an egg on the Passover on the Seder plate, and we eat the egg before the meal.
Customary.
That is customary. Very good. I was going to say some people eat the egg. It's customary to eat the egg, so that would have given it away.
And they should
Pulling
make it in
Elijah's
the
cup.
dash egg cooker.
What do you say?
And they should be making it in the dash egg cooker.
Exactly. Also, having potato kugel at your Shabbos table and gefilte fish. These are all customs. Elijah's cup, is that received, derived, legislated, or customary?
I'm guessing derived.
It
No,
is
that was
customary.
given. That was. Oh, that is.
Oh.
How are we supposed to know these?
Okay, so that was fun. And in closing, I will be playing for you the video of the points, the bullet points. I don't know why I'm super tired. I'm sure you are as well. The words just were not coming to me tonight. Next week, we will be talking about arguments. How could there be arguments in the Talmud, and how do we deal with arguments when assumingly everything is derived, coming from God, given from Moses? Where is there place for arguments in that case? And stay tuned for next week. Enjoy.
Lesson 3.
Thank you.
1. The Torah authorizes the sages to enact new ordinances, and God guides them to the proper conclusions. 2. Rabbinic enactments are intended to fix societal problems, safeguard against biblical transgression, or promote religious observance. 3. Enactments issued by the sages must be presented as rabbinic laws, not as God-given instructions. 4. The sages may not pass an enactment unless they assess that the majority of the population can tolerate it, and if the population never accepted it, the law is void. 5. Customs initiated by the people to enhance religious observance reflect our deepest bond with God. 6. The categories of Torah that place greater emphasis on human initiative are crucial for fulfilling the ultimate purpose of creation. Next week. For many, Talmud is synonymous with debate. Indeed, Jewish law abounds with disagreements and dissenting opinions. Does that mean Jewish law is just a matter of opinion? Furthermore, do the debates indicate that the system is not divine? How can there be multiple opinions in a God-given Torah? Is Talmudic debate unfortunate or ideal? Lastly, how is a final halacha determined in the event of differing opinions? Join us next week for an intriguing discussion about this topic.
Thank you for joining us this evening, and I hope to see you next week.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Good night,
Rabbi.
everyone.
Everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
You're all the best.